really thank him for coming today. His opponent declined our invitation to speak to the group, so it is good to hear from one perspective in this race. So with that, Rob, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Dan. I will introduce my staff. This is Brian in the back, and Daniel, and Katie, and I hope you don't mind, staff, but I saved the best for last.
Of course.
My wife, Allison, has joined us today, and thanks for being here, Allison. I appreciate that. We don't always get to meet up on the campaign trail, so you should take this as a compliment that she wanted to come here. I think she was attracted more by you than she was that I was going to be here. But Allison and I have been married for 25 plus years, right, Allison?
Right.
Okay, and we have 3 sons. In fact, there's information I think in front of you, so I won't tell you all about our family, even though I like talking about that subject. I appreciate that you would permit us to be here, and that you'd give me the opportunity to address some things that I think are very important to our state and to this region, that frankly are important to me, and I believe that they're important to you as well. And so I'll spend a few minutes here sharing with you a little bit about my background, about why I'm running, and what I would do and intend to do if the voters will permit me the opportunity to serve. So as the food comes, help yourself. Don't wait. Don't be bashful or shy about eating, and you don't offend me. And if you need something, just let me know. I'll grab a roll or something. Allison and I are from the area. We were both born and raised in the Portland area. In fact, Allison was just speaking to Leanne, the chairwoman of the Beaverton School Board, who, by the way, I appreciate Leanne Larson's endorsement of my candidacy. I also appreciate Sarah, the vice chairwoman of the school board's endorsement of my candidacy. And it's always great to be with them and to learn from them about the important topic of education. But Allison actually grew up in Beaverton, and she was chatting with Leanne about that. And I grew up here in Tigard. In fact, I was just talking to Brendan a second ago that the Tigard High grad, I wasn't quite good enough to get into Tigard High, so they sent me to Newburgh. And I grew up in Tigard, but my high school years were spent in Newburgh, and that's where I met Allison, whose family moved to Newburgh as well. So fortunately, that was one great thing about moving to Yamhill County from Washington County, is we got to meet each other. But I grew up not far from here. I used to go grocery shopping. Maybe, Liz, maybe 30 years ago. You remember the store that was just down the street? Well, it used to be Prairie Market.
Yeah, but before that it was Gerard.
Okay, well there you go. That's where I used to do my grocery shopping when I was a younger boy, and it was a great experience growing up here in Tigard. Have many fond memories. When we started our family, we have 3 boys, as I mentioned. We chose Tualatin to live and to also start a business. Speaking of the business, I've been a small business owner with Allison for the last 16 plus years. And we started this little company called Game Face Incorporated out of a spare bedroom in our home. And over the years, we've been fortunate enough to employ about 60 people. And when we bring on an employee, we always have a conversation because we realize we're really bringing on a new family. That employee may be single, but we still consider them and their future, part of our family. And certainly, if they are a husband or a wife or a mom or a dad, when we take on that responsibility to hire, we know that we're really effectively responsible for their kids and their family's welfare to a large extent. So we've always been very methodic about when we hire. We've always tried to do it very responsibly. And sometimes we've hired very quickly, and sometimes we've had to recognize that because of circumstances, you have to make changes in the way a business operates. About 3.5 years ago, we decided to move out of an office space in Tualatin that was about 6,800 square feet, and change the way that we deliver services to our clients, and put our employees in home-based offices all around the region here. And that's how our business has been operating, as I say, for the last 3.5 years. And then 2.5 years ago, unbeknownst to my employees, and after a very poignant conversation with my spouse, I decided to run for Congress. It was unexpected. It was not something I'd ever planned to do. And Allison, what were the first words out of your mouth when I suggested this?
I said, are you crazy?
Yeah, and then the second one was, where did that come from? Because this had never been discussed in our married life and in our courtship. But I decided that in this particular district, in the first district, we really needed to have better representation. Because I felt for so many years, my interests and the interests of my friends, my employees, members of my community were not being properly represented. And granted, there's always going to be differences. You'll have differences from me, with me, if I'm your congressman. I'll have differences with you. But I'm talking about real representation, where you feel like you have a voice, where you feel like someone's, fighting your cause, someone's being a champion for what's important to you back in Washington, D.C. And I simply didn't feel that we had that. Turns out, I think I was right. Because right now, we are the only district out of 435 in the entire country that doesn't have representation in Congress. We don't have a voice. And I find that to be, quite frankly, not only disappointing, but shameful. And I know some of you don't live in the first district, but for those of you who do, I want you to know I think we happen to live in the best district in the state. And I think you'd all agree that what happens in the first district affects the economic future of the state of Oregon. And if you're not quite sure of the district boundaries, I hope you don't mind if I just spend a moment sharing those with you. It consists of basically 5 counties. I'm going to start in Yamhill County, where we went to high school, down south. It's all of Yamhill County. It's all of Washington County. If you go out to the coast, it's all of Clatsop County, which goes clear up to the corner of the state, Astoria, Warrenton. It's also all of Columbia County, directly north of us, up against the Columbia River. And it's West Multnomah County. So I should say it's the western part of Multnomah County. So if it's a southwest or northwest Portland address, chances are it's in this district. Everything east of the Willamette is in Congressman Blumenauer's district. So that's essentially the northwest Portland sector, and that's District 1 of the first district. I happen to think, as I said, it's richly blessed with resources. We have the wonderful, agricultural community of Yamhill County, wineries and vineyards and nurseries and nut farms like in Newburgh, and there is a joke there, but I'm not going to take it. We also have the small businesses and the high-tech sector and the outdoor and athletic equipment manufacturers right here in Washington County. We have obviously the business sector of downtown Portland, the hub of economic activity for our state. We have the timber industry of Columbia County. We have the fisheries and the tourism on the coast. What an eclectic district. I mean, what resources, what great assets we have. But on top of that, I gotta say, I've always felt we've got the greatest talent centered in this district, either people who live here or people who work here. And I don't think that we're reflective of that through our congressional representation, and that's why 2.5 years ago I decided to step away from my small business, leave it in the hands of my very capable employees, and make this run for Congress. Now, you probably know I wasn't successful last fall, or I should say the fall of 2010. This is a whole different time. It's a whole different set of circumstances. I feel very good about our chances in a little over 3 weeks. I'm sorry that my fellow candidate chose not to be here today, because I think it's very important for voters to understand the differences. So I'll do my best to tell you about my views and thoughts, and those things that I know where she stands, I'll share those with you, those things that are pretty much out there. But I guess it's only fair to say I'll let her speak for herself for the most part. There's one overriding issue that surrounds this campaign, and it's obviously how are we going to either preserve or create jobs in Oregon. And for those of you who work for the public sector, you know as well as I do that we have to have a strong, vibrant private sector at all times. We have to have important, vital government services. And all of us look to government for help and assistance in those vital services. But if we don't have a strong, vibrant private sector, if we're not encouraging entrepreneurship, if we're not encouraging investment in this state, if we're not encouraging education, which will encourage people to stay in this state, or if not to stay here, at least even to move here and set up a business and hire people here. If we're not competitive in the educational world, then obviously we're not going to be able to afford the government services that we all want and that you help provide. So how do we do this? Now, a lot of politicians, quite frankly, talk about, well, we got to create jobs. And I always find that a little amusing from people who have never really had experience doing so. As I said, we've created 60 jobs in our company. And I would also tell you another fact about our background, my background, that I think is salient, is that GameFace doesn't just service clients, organizations, and if you haven't already heard about our business, primarily our industry is the sports world. Not entirely, but primarily. And so we work with the Portland Trail Blazers or the Portland Timbers and about 398 other franchises around the country in professional sports. And we give them best business practices so that they can run a very successful enterprise, take care of their fans, so that they have a great reputation and a great story to tell in their local community. But along the way in servicing those teams, the other thing, as I said, that I'm proud to tell you is that we also have taken job seekers who, for whatever reason, want to work in our industry. They've graduated from college in almost every case, but they can't find a job. Maybe some of you relate to this. Maybe you have a friend or a former roommate who relates to this. And they'd love to get the Trailblazers' attention. Now, they know they'll never be a power forward. But, they'd like to work in the business operation of the Blazers. So what they would do is they would come to GameFace. Specifically, they would come to our office in Tualatin over the course of almost 10 years. And we would train them in the skills that our clients are looking for in new hires. And then after those skills have been developed by these people, these trainees, if you will, from all over the country, not just local, we would then introduce them to our client base of teams, and we would say to the New York Mets, we would say to the St. Louis Cardinals, we would say to, the Houston Rockets or the Denver Broncos, hey, we've got someone here who we think not only has the skills you're looking for, but would be a great match for your organization. How do we know this? Well, because we've been in your office. We know your people. We know your culture. We know your environment. We know what you're trying to accomplish at the Miami Dolphins. So we'd like to introduce you to Jill. She'd be a great hire for you. Now, many times the Dolphins would say, well, we're not hiring. But because the Dolphins have trust in our company, we would try to explain to them the merits of creating an opening for the Jills of the world. Most of the time, we were successful in making that case for Jill. The Dolphins would say, okay, we'll talk to her. And after 1.5 interviews on average, these trainees got full-time jobs, careers. So I know a little bit about job creation. I've not only signed paychecks for 195 straight months for my own employees, never missing a payroll in that time, but I've also been able to assist about 500 people open up their own career outside of my business. So I know a little bit of whereof I speak. How do we create jobs in Oregon, and not to mention around the country? You have to create an environment where people who would hire are motivated to do so and aren't fearful of it. In other words, you got to create an environment of certainty, of predictability as best you can through government, through policy. See, the fact is predictability is boring in sports, and it's terrible if you go to a movie. But in business, it's absolutely critical. And I believe the reason why most people are not hiring today is because there is policy or a lack thereof out of Washington, D.C., which is discouraging that kind of risk-taking. And people are just simply saying, I'd love to add more personnel, but I don't know what's going to cost me. I don't know what the ramifications are going to be. How I'm going to pay for their benefits, their health care, because I don't know what health care is going to cost down the road. I don't know what the tax implications are of new people. Shoot, I don't even know what the payroll tax is going to be on March 1st of this year. That's the epitome of uncertainty which Congress has produced. So with my background, I think I can go back with that perspective and say, as a congressman, here's the kind of environment or the path those who would create jobs, those who would invest, those who would start their own little business need. Now specifically, what might I propose? Let me give you 3 things. And by the way, if you want to learn more about these 3 things I'm going to share with you, the 3 pillars of job creation, go to my website. For months, I've had a lot of details on my website about policy. And only recently did my opponent decide to start writing about policy. But if you want to get into the weeds on some of the issues that are important to you, I challenge you to go to my website and and make sure you have some time, because it'll take some time to get through all of our policy pages. But there's also a page there about job creation. It's called the Jobs Plan. So here's the jobs plan in a nutshell. 3 things to do. First, this country needs to go back and simplify, reform, overhaul our tax code. What do I mean by that? Well, right now our tax code is full of thousands of pages of maze-like loopholes that frankly, which by the way were written by lawyers and lobbyists, that frankly can only be understood by the mega corporations who can afford lawyers and lobbyists. And what do the mega corporations of our country do with those loopholes? They actually make money off the tax code. Example, General Electric made $14.1 billion last year in profits. Most of that came overseas, by the way. The vast majority of it came overseas. And yet General Electric, with that kind of profit, paid 0 federal income tax last year. Now, I don't think that's fair. I'm a small business owner. I can't get away with paying 0 federal income tax, nor can any business on Main Street here in Tigard. But how does GE get away with it? How does a company called Pepco, which is an energy company, get away with it? How do they actually make money off the tax code? Again, they have figured out the loopholes. And if they haven't figured them out, they've helped write them through their lobbyists and lawyers. This is hurting our economy. It's hurting small business, which nationally, 70% of our jobs are created by small businesses. If you're wondering, by the way, what a small business is, it's anything under 500 employees. We've got a lot of those here in Oregon. In Oregon, it's about 60% of our jobs come from small business. So if we want to spur job growth, we've got to do things to help small businesses. And that means simplifying the tax code. Getting rid of most of those corporate loopholes, which are doing nobody any good except the mega corporations and, frankly, the mega rich. The second thing you do is you lower the tax rates across the board. This means for everybody, especially the middle class. If you lower tax rates, it means you're putting more money into your pocket so that you can put that money back into the economy. Maybe you pay your mortgage. Maybe you pay your rent. Maybe you pay for education. Maybe you buy a product or a service. And the more that we're spending responsibly as consumers, the more businesses say, oh, they want my product and service. I'm going to add people to meet the demand, to build more products. These things that I'm talking about, the simplification, the more predictable, the more fair tax code that I'm supporting, this is not brain surgery, folks. Our country has done this as recently as 1997. In 1997, we had a Democrat president and a Republican Congress who came together to simplify the tax code. And what was the result? Well, first of all, we balanced the budget. Second, we had a surplus. We had more tax revenue than expenses. And we had unemployment around 4%. Boy, can you imagine that? Unemployment around 4%, those were the days. And it was just about 15 years ago. And prior to that, about 11 years prior to that, in the 1980s, we had the same thing happen with a Republican president and a Democrat Speaker of the House who came together and said, you know what? The economy is the one thing that we can all agree on. We need to fix our economy. So let's find a way in this collaborative body we call Congress, let's find a way to reach common ground. So it's been done before. Unfortunately, we have special interests, we have parties that are so entrenched in their own particular interest that they have no interest in yours. And that's why they refuse to come to the table and get something done. Or what they do get done is so temporary, it has no lasting effect. It builds no confidence in the minds of, frankly, people like me, who would like to hire. Or people right outside this door, who would like to maybe, they'd like to spend a little money on something that they think is important to them right now, but they just don't have the resources. Or they're not sure if they can afford it because they don't even know what their tax bill is going to be in 2012. So, this is a simple thing. It just requires the right personalities, the right skill set, the right temperament to sit together, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and figure it out. But these Band-Aid approaches are not working. Second thing that we have to do to drive jobs, especially in Oregon, is to recognize, as I mentioned at the top of my remarks, what we're good at. And we're good at producing products and services that the world wants. And when we produce those at a greater rate than we are today, I'm confident we'll find countries and markets all over the world that will buy our products and services. It's called trade. And right now, we are dealing in a district that, though we are successful in many areas, we could be so much more successful if we had a representative that was out there championing these products and services to the world. Now, one thing I didn't share with you is that before I was married and then after Allison and I got married, both times, in both stages of my life, I lived in Japan. I used to speak fluent Japanese. I spent 2.5 years of my life in Asia. In fact, Allison and I, after we were married, about a year or two after we were married, we actually worked in Japan. She and I both taught in the Japanese public school system. So our employer was the Japanese Ministry of Education. I remember as a young man graduating from high school in Oregon, Vic Atiyeh, our governor. He was a very collaborative Republican governor of Oregon. And what he did is he went to Japan, he went to other Asian countries, and he brought back business. And Japanese and other type of companies would come here and they'd hire our workers. And they'd build stuff with us here. And we had terrific job growth at that time. But we've lost a lot of that. But if you look at who our major employers are in the first district, Intel, with nearly 16,000 employees, or soon to be. Nike, with about 6,000 employees. Columbia Sportswear, with about 4,000 to 5,000 employees. Those three top companies of the first district, each one of them depend 100% on international trade. And so do their employees by extension. And I would add, here in the Portland region, according to the Brookings Institution based in DC, in the Portland region, we have 268,000 jobs today that rely on international business. Just think what we could do if we actually had a congressman who wanted to be more aggressive in opening up international markets for us. This is where I am on the side of President Obama. This is where I'm on the side of Senator Ron Wyden, both of whom have said trade will create job growth in this country. Our last congressman was opposed to most trade. And my opponent didn't decide until about a month ago whether or not she wanted to support the recent free trade agreements that Congress and the President both authorized, which open up more markets such as in Korea and Colombia and Panama. She said she needed more time to think about it. Well, with all due respect, she's been a legislator from the Beaverton area for 5 years. Beaverton happens to be the home of some of the largest companies in this state. If she doesn't already know if trade is good for our area, I don't think she's qualified to serve in this district. I've been a champion for free trade and for fair trade agreements for years. And I want to point out the word agreement. I'm not saying trade at any cost. I'm saying that when you sign an agreement with Korea, South Korea, you have to make sure that they live by the rules. And so does China. And when they're not, as the congressman, you raise your hand and you say to our executive branch in Washington DC, the Commerce Department, you have to enforce the rules for us here because it's hurting Oregon businesses. That's what my role would be. The third area that's absolutely critical is that in order for us to give confidence in the minds of people who would invest in our country and start by risking and hiring people again, is you've got to let them know that the federal government is going to get their fiscal house in order. Ultimately, over time, I believe we have to have a balanced budget in the federal government. I dare say, in each of the offices you work in, you probably are required to have a balanced budget at the end of the year. If you don't, bad things are going to happen to you. You probably lose your job. But in the federal government, there is no such rule. There is no such expectation. Now granted, there are things that happen in the course of our life, in the course of our country's history, that are unexpected, such as a war, such as natural disasters. In those cases, there need to be exceptions. But we need to put a balanced budget in place in this country, and I don't believe it can happen overnight. It's going to take years to accomplish because we're in such a deep fix right now. Last year, 2011, we ran a $1.3 trillion deficit. It was the second highest in our country's history. You know when the first highest was? 2009. You know what the third highest deficit was in our country's history? 2010. You see a pattern here? That has to be stopped. Now you can't stop it all at once. Because if you balance the budget, say January 1st, 2013, with the kind of deficits we're running right now, you would have to do one of two things. You'd either have to spike taxes dramatically during an economic downturn, which even the president admits you should not do during a recession, or you'd have to cut services dramatically, which we can't afford to do because so many people right now are hurting in this economy. So it's a measured approach that we have to, and by the way, why do you have to do that if you have a balanced budget amendment? Because it's an amendment to the Constitution. It requires you to balance it. It's not an option. It's a constitutional mandate. I don't believe we're ready for that. But I believe 10 years from now, for example, even 8 years from now, that can be an attainable goal if we have the right people in Congress who will say, you know what, let's take the next 8 to 10 years and let's figure out how we can make the corrective steps to raise revenues, decrease expenses, and balance our books. This will give consumers confidence. It will give investors confidence. And it will give voters confidence that our elected officials are taking care of the resources we're sending to them. And right now, we don't have much confidence in Congress. Because all we see is the bickering, the arguing, the gamesmanship, the partisanship, and we're all suffering as a result. Those three things, I believe, will create an environment for job creation in this country. It took us a long time to get into this predicament. It's going to take us some time to get out of it. I think we've got to put the right people who have that kind of mentality back in Congress. And with all due respect to my fellow candidate, I don't think the problem in Congress today is that we don't have enough lawyers. I think the problem in Congress today is that we don't have enough people who've actually created a job and know what would be required to create more jobs. That's why I'm running. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about anything I'm saying or anything I'm not saying. I would just want to forewarn you that because the Democrat Party decided to bring a camera rather than a candidate, everything here today is going to be recorded, and we have no control over where that recording may end up. So I'm just saying that for your own protection, because anything you say, your face and your voice will be recorded. I'm sorry that that's the case, and because we knew that was happening, we decided to bring our own camera as well. Otherwise, I'd love to talk with you so you could speak freely without cameras, but that's the card that we're dealt today. So anyone have any comments, questions, observations?
Bob, quickly on the, we had a guest from the Blazers join us. Speaking of your background in sports, Tim from the Trail Blazers.
Good to see you.
My question is about, coming from a public sector family, both parents involved in government. Obviously, most of us are in the public sector, and that's something that you lack on your resume. You hear the term run government like a business a lot of times. How do you make up for that lack of government experience in knowing how to navigate the routes in Washington D.C. and locally?
Well, I don't, I obviously can't deny that that's not part of my resume, but there are a lot of people back in Congress right now, most of them, I mean, most is an understatement, I'd say probably 98% of them, came in with public sector experience, or I should say elected office experience, and look where it's put us today. I'm not saying that's why we're in the fix we're in, but I'm not convinced that that's what we need as a prerequisite to have effective government. I think we need balance, Ken. I think we need balance. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Here in Salem, this last year, 2011, we had a 30-30 split in the House of Representatives in our state legislature. We had a 16-14 split in the Senate. This is the closest we've ever had to having true balance back down in Salem for our benefit. And what happened? I think you would admit, as I will, some pretty positive developments came out of that balance. I think we need the same thing from our congressional delegation of Oregon. Right now, we have 6 Democrats and 1 Republican serving in Congress, House and Senate, from Oregon. And I don't think it's served our interests well. Look at the evidence. The evidence is Oregon has been 15 straight years above the national average in unemployment. We are number 1 in child hunger. We are in the top 5 in foreclosures. We're near the top in homelessness, poverty, child trafficking. I mean, we obviously have some problems here in this state. And I believe that if we return some balance to the state, we could find a more collaborative delegation that could produce better results for us. Let me give a couple of quick examples of this. First of all, let's go back in time. I have always held up as a model of someone who shared my party affiliation, but at the same time you knew that they were everyone's representative, and that was Mark Hatfield. He fought for everybody in this state. He didn't care what party affiliation you were. I also would hold up as model Tom McCall, former governor, same way, very independently minded Republican. Vic Attia, who I mentioned earlier, our last Republican governor, very independently minded Republican. I'll never be in the same class as those guys because of the things that they accomplished. But it doesn't stop me from trying to emulate the qualities that they had. And that is they were willing to work with anybody who had a reasonable idea, who was willing to have a conversation. But right now we have such polarization in Congress that I think we have to ask ourselves, who has the background, the experience to do some big things for Oregon? Not just be a placeholder, not just be a button pusher, but do big things, to be bold, even audacious, to show leadership. Who has demonstrated that in their career? Who has been innovative in their career that we can have serving us in Oregon back in Congress? And I not only, I think, have that kind of background, modesty aside, but I also am one who recognizes there's a lot of ideas coming from the other side we need to be looking at. I have applauded Ron Wyden several times in the last 3 weeks for ideas that he's been espousing. Whether it be on trade, whether it be on how we fix Medicare, whether it be how we fix our timber payment issue that we're having in our rural counties right now. Same with Peter DeFazio. So I don't have the legislative experience, but I have real world experience. I know how to create jobs. My opponent's never done it in their life. And I think that's what we need right now. This is the time for that kind of background. Thank you, Liz.
I have a question about infrastructure. You're talking about job creation, and if businesses can't get their products to the airport or to the port, or their employees can't get to their business or whatever, what about addressing the infrastructure needs of this country, which are, way underfunded, and just really in need of help, and I haven't heard many people talk about that link to job creation.
Good.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm gonna take your lead on that. When you talk about a link from infrastructure to job creation, one example of that is the CRC, the Columbia River Crossing. I think you're all familiar with what I'm talking about, right? I've said we need to move forward. We need to build the bridge. For a whole host of reasons. But just to take your lead, if I may, Liz, in order for us to be competitive, not just with the Salt Lake cities and the Denvers and the Minneapolises and the Austins of this country, but to also to be competitive with the Shanghais and the Tokyos and the Osakas of this world, we have got to create an infrastructure that's more reliable for moving products and services, not to mention people, because it's good economically. But if I'm looking, for example, to bring a business here and have a warehouse or a distribution center, and I recognize that for me to get to Seattle, I have to sit in this log jam that we call I-5 north of the Rose Quarter. North of the Rose Quarter, it's all your fault. This is going to now increase the cost of doing business here. Not to mention increase the time it takes to be efficient in my business. So I start looking elsewhere. And we can't afford that in Oregon. And this is where the congressional delegation needs to have a strong voice to say, in my case, to my own party, who has the majority in the House, where we appropriate funds, whether it be for transportation or elsewhere, to say to the party, if you're serious, Republicans, about creating jobs, we have a project right now in Oregon that needs this. This is a huge job creator. Not only construction for the next 8 years, but for all the ancillary services that will be needed, and how it will also motivate and encourage and inspire people to bring jobs to Oregon. So you're absolutely right. It's a critical link of the chain to grow jobs here. You've got to have a reliable infrastructure. Now, I have to say, though, for the record, I'm no apologist for the fact that we have spent $137 million of taxpayer funds on that project over the last 6 years, and we haven't seen a shovel hit the ground yet. As a small business owner, I don't get that. I can't afford to sit around for 6 years and talk about something, especially when I'm using your money to do it. You got to take action. And you also have to hold the people that are spending that money accountable. There has to be greater transparency in the process. So I do not at all fault people who are in this community who are saying, we don't want it built because it looks like a boondoggle. It looks like crony capitalism. It looks like people who are profiting off a concept as opposed to construction. I get that. But that's why I think you need a strong voice, someone who has a magnifying glass when it comes to the bottom line, which a small business owner has to have in this economy, sitting in this seat to move forward with that project. And I would also add, it's not just transportation. We have to continue to develop affordable energy, and I did this figuratively. Okay? You also have to continue to develop affordable energy in this state. Right now, we have pretty good energy. This is why we're a server farm. We have server farms starting up in eastern and central Oregon. They recognize this is an asset Oregon has. We have to continue to be a leader in this area. Developing energy that's affordable, that's reliable, that's safe, and we also need to make sure, if I may, that we have an educational system that is attractive to companies that might want to move their families here. Because you look at Intel, and you look at what's happening in the Hillsborough School District. That school district is frankly blossoming. And neighboring school districts, even Forest Grove, and down south in Sherwood, and hopefully ours in Twelfth and Tigard. And obviously Beaverton, right next to Hillsborough. These school districts can do more because we've attracted that type of enterprise to the region. But in order to keep them there, you've got to show them we've got we've got effective schools. And this is an infrastructure, mind you, Liz, but I'm a huge supporter of the idea that you got to bring more local control in how we run, operate, and pay for our schools. I don't believe that Washington, D.C. is smarter than Leanne on what's best for Beaverton children. I trust Leanne and Sarah and the people who work with them to be able to make those calls. And so, rather than sending money to DC and hope it comes back, I propose we keep more money in the Beaverton School District and let those administrators and teachers use those funds to educate the kids they feel is the best way of doing it. I have total confidence in our teachers, but they have to be given the resources and the tools to be successful. We could talk a lot further about education, but I just wanted to say that because that's part of the buildup of driving business here. Thank you.
I have a
Yeah.
follow-up question on the, speaking of infrastructure, one of the probably least known recent attempts at modifying the tax code, which would have been devastating for Oregon municipalities and all the country, was our own Senator Wyden's attempt to eliminate tax exemption for municipal bonds. That's what I do for a living, so. I'm
Are you gonna get wonkish on us right now?
There have been many attempts, not only by Senator Wyden, but President Obama, at modifying the tax code and raising the borrowing costs that our local jurisdictions have to build those very needed infrastructure projects. Thankfully, they haven't gone nowhere, and we're still with the same system that we have right now. But what is your take on those attempts that could damage substantially the ability of local governments to borrow money at substantially lower rates so that they can provide these services to our
I would like, for the benefit of everybody, where do you think that really germinated, or what was the genesis of that? Was there a piece of legislation?
Yep.
I'm thinking of Dodd-Frank.
No,
What do you
Or
think?
Dodd-Frank, there were different attempts, the Hire Act, for example, and the Jobs Act from the president, that they were trying to increase revenue. So let's tax interest on municipal bonds so that you can generate more revenue in Washington DC, at the expense of increasing borrowing costs from all of the local jurisdictions who are gonna have to pay more to build a police station or a high school, and guess who's gonna end up paying for that? Our taxpayers. That type of representation that to me is not linked to our local interests is something that bothers me, and it's something that I would like to hear your
Well,
take on that.
let me just say this, some people want to continue to raise taxes in a broken system. That doesn't work. I'll give you one quick example, if I may. And I'm thinking about this because it came up this morning in a conversation that I had with somebody. They asked me about eliminating the Bush tax cuts, okay? It's a very prickly subject. And frankly, it's become a very partisan subject, and I don't even like the term Bush tax cuts. I think it's an unfair or a derisive term, because in actuality, President Obama extended the quote Bush tax cuts a year ago. So he as much subscribes to it as did President Bush originally. Nevertheless, the Bush tax cuts, if they're eliminated, by all estimates, by economists that I trust, that would bring about $100 billion in new revenue to our country. If you say those people, you no longer get that tax cut. Okay, good, we just raised $100 billion. Let's remember now what last year's deficit was. 1.3 trillion. Okay, now we're at 1.2. Y'all feel better? See, this is silliness. The math doesn't add up. I'll give you another example. If you take all the income from the top 1% of our country, and I'm no apologist or defender of the top 1%, they'll take care of themselves. But I just want to talk math with you. If you take the top 1%'s income, tax them at 100% of their income, guess how much we raise? About $1.5 trillion, according to the Economist magazine. 1.5 trillion. Okay, great, we just paid for 1 year's deficit. Now what are we going to do in year 2? With the current spending and the current lack of job growth. We're totally messed up. You're going to eliminate all the wealth in the country, and you saved us for you saved 1 year's deficit. Can we get serious? I mean, this idea of let's continue to tax at a higher rate, let's eliminate any kind of incentive for job growth, and we will fix our problems, it's nothing more than political chicanery. It's not going to do anything long term. I want to go back and find long-term fixes. which, as I said earlier, are not going to come overnight. We have to take a measured approach. And that's why I believe we need to go back and overhaul the tax system. Start over. Now, you don't throw the whole economy into a bucket of ice water all at one time. You gotta, it's a stair-step approach. Frankly, this is the way Allison and I have run our business. We don't ever make drastic decisions instantaneously. We think about it. We study it out. We try to give our employees a heads up. Hey, here's what's gonna happen 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now. So everyone can make a necessary adjustment. So I think a quick fix that too many politicians resort to is, well, let's just tax more. But here's the other thing I gotta say, Javier, about this whole idea of taxing more. Give me evidence that even if I wanted to give you all my income in taxes, you'd use it responsibly. Show me how that's. Does Solyndra provide you confidence? Does the CRC, with its $137 million bill right now, and there isn't one construction job yet created from it, does that give you confidence? So even if I wanted to give you more taxes, I'd like to know what you're doing with it. And if I could just use one quick example, if we all decided we're going to pool together and we're all going to give Javier $10 a piece to go invest for us, and then a year from now we meet here for lunch and we say, Javier, what'd you do with that $10 we all invested with you? And he goes, well, I squandered it. I went bankrupt with it. How many of you are eager to give him another $10 right now? You're going to say, okay, we're gonna look elsewhere. Thanks, Javier. Love you, dude. But we're gonna spend our money elsewhere. Let's go find another person who could be more responsible with our money. That's where we're at with our government. You can either have more of the same, or you can put your trust, your future, in the hands of people who did not have political aspirations. Who, if you believe this, I'm running because I think it's the right way to serve my state and serve my country. Because I've got my character witness over here in the corner who will tell you this was never an ambition of mine, never a goal of mine professionally. But I think it's the right thing to do, and that's why we're working so hard to make it happen.
By the way, I won't take any money.
We have time for one more question if it's very brief.
Okay. Well, let me just conclude then, if I could, with a statement. I'll use the time to make a statement. You all. Well, let me just conclude then, if I could, with a statement. I'll use the time to make a statement. You all want me. I can tell by looking in your eyes. Except yours. You all want me to go back to Washington, D.C. and work with whomever I can to move this country forward, don't you? You're tired of people just planting themselves in a corner and refusing to come out and work together. That gridlock, as they call it. It's not helping us. I pledge to you I will be that kind of congressman. I've already demonstrated it in my campaign. I've demonstrated it in my professional life. I've demonstrated it in my public service as a community activist, as a member of the board of the Oregon Special Olympics, as a member of the board of the Oregon League of Minority Voters, as a member of the board of the Oregon Air Show, as the former president of Southside Soccer Club, which is based right here in Tigard. I've demonstrated the ability to work with people regardless of their party affiliation. So that's the pledge I'm making to you today. But I have a challenge for you. If you want me to be nonpartisan, will you be nonpartisan in how you vote this year? In how you vote as early as 10 days from now when you get your ballot. If you've never voted for a Republican before, I challenge you to consider me as the person you're going to vote for. Because how can you expect me and the other 434 people back in Congress to work together and to think outside of the box and to think in a nonpartisan fashion if you're not willing to do it right here at home? So I'm making my pledge to you, and I'm asking you to seriously consider, if you weren't going to vote for me before today, I'm asking you to change the way you think. Because that's what's going to be required if our state's ever going to fix the situation we're in, and we're going to work together. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to be with you today. I thank you for your questions. I encourage you to go to cornillesforcongress.com and learn more. If you'd like to help us, if you'd like to volunteer your time after work someday or some weekend, give us an hour of your time. If you believe in the things that I'm sharing with you, If you believe in this and want to help other people learn about it, these two folks here, or Brian, would love to learn about your name and how we can get in touch with you, or simply go on our website and sign up to be a volunteer, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Kent, and thank you to everybody for being here. Appreciate it.